and welcome back to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the people that count in the history of mathematics. I'm your host, Benjamin Cornish, and today we're getting schooled on the all-too-short life of Hypatia of Alexandria. I used to have a friend who was a pirate. Well, I say that. She worked in procurement. Now, I know what you are thinking. Surely working in procurement is just a euphemism for being a pirate. But a true pirate refers to their occupation as mergers and acquisitions. As it happens, my friend worked in the logistical element, dockside, for a pirate organisation. She was the assistant to the quartermaster, which I think made her an eighth master. She fetched the rum, sourced the parrots, and had to find 8.2 metres of rope, the whole 9 yards. The trouble was, just as the pirate ship was getting ready for its big voyage to procure some pieces of 8, they were rounded up by the forces of His Royal Majesty's Navy, and she was hanged, along with the rest of the crew, as a pirate. She had never stepped on a boat, but was an integral member of the team. In fact, many of the previous voyages were only possible due to her securing the provisions. So, was she a pirate? She walked like a pirate, she talked like a pirate, and she was murdered for being a pirate. Never been at sea. So, you tell me. Hypatia was born about 370 CE in, wait for it, Alexandria. I know that this is becoming one of my less than best running jokes of the show, but alas, it might be the last time. And part of that is due to Hypatia and the story that surrounds her. From next week, I might be saying, I used to have a series of friends who were influential mathematicians working from Alexandria. She was born about 370 and died only about 45 years later. Alas, now that we finally get to talk about a female mathematician on history, it becomes a sad story, because of course it had to. The problem with women scientists, philosophers, leaders and mathematicians of history is they were surrounded by men. So Hypatia was tutored from a young age in mathematics by her father, also a big name of maths history. This is Theon of Alexandria, though he didn't get an episode because he was a bit, well, dull. He did, however, rewrite a textbook of Euclid's to make it more accessible to students, i.e. his daughter. Now, when she grew up, she inherited the school from her father and was the lead lecturer and administrator. This is for the biggest and indeed the last great school of mathematics and philosophy of Alexandria, following in the footsteps of Euclid himself. You might remember that Alexandria is famous for the museum and library, together one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The lights of the library mostly went out around 100 BCE, never really regained from that high days, although the museum continued as an institution into Roman rule. And then in 270 CE, the Roman Emperor Aurelian conquered Alexandria and destroyed the library along with a significant portion of the city during this conquest. Theon, Hypatia's father, was considered a man of the museum, although it's not really clear what his connection was. Then in 391, so when Hypatia was in her young 20s, the Temple of Serapis, which housed a vast collection of the library, was destroyed by the Christian patriarch Theophilus. So this would make Hypatia one of the first school leaders in a post-Golden Age Alexandria, but with a familial link to the bygone age. She taught under the model of Neoplatonism, as designed by Plotinus and Iamblichus, although is noted for taking this to a more robust extreme. She was a charismatic leader, and her pupils wrote her letters of admiration. One of the notable points of Neoplatonism is that there is a greater truth of existence that sits layers above that of the physical or mental world. Closer in principle to the forms of Plato, although neo-wised a bit. If one were a mathematician, one might consider the immutable realm of mathematics to be this higher plane of existence. But who could say? I will direct you to your nearest philosopher to find out more about Neoplatonism. Sadly, by age 45, Hypatia had not yet developed her own original contribution to the pantheon of mathematics. Her strength lay in her teaching and dissemination of knowledge. What she did do, with great enthusiasm is work on commentaries and reading materials based on other works. She co-wrote with her father an 11-part commentary of the Almagest by Ptolemy. She also helped him finish his work on Euclid's Elements, which became the definitive version for a few hundred years. She also wrote significant commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica and on Apollonius's Conics and other astronomical works from Ptolemy. Would you like me to quote you some of the passages? Well, sorry, I can't. The historians of old, mostly men, did not save her contributions with the same care and dedication that they did with ancient men. I would sincerely love to tell you more about her amazing contributions to maths and philosophy, but that branch of the story ends here. Perhaps we could all take a moment to think about our own maths teacher, the huge impact they had on our own lives, and how their legacy lives on through the work that we do. And maybe we should all send our teachers a message of thanks. If you are one of mine, through Blue Sky at Mathematicians-Pod. But we still have plenty of time on today's episode, and I'm not really done with Hypatia. We can also talk about her impact on the world of politics and early religion. Hypatia was a pagan, which is something we don't say often on the podcast because pretty much everyone up until now was a pagan. But now it's starting to mean something. In Alexandria, she had developed enough close connections with the influential men by teaching them philosophy and maths, so much so that she was largely welcomed into the political world of the city. She attended meetings that were men only and spoke on behalf of issues relating to morality and philosophical purity. She had the ear of the Roman prefect and was also well liked by the citizenry. As I say, she was a pagan, and that's going to become a problem. So, should we finally talk about the Christians? I think I might need to do a personal disclaimer here, as we are going to be discussing a topic that is close to many people's hearts. I used to be a Christian. One might say I used to have a friend who was the Son of God, if one were doing a podcast introduction. Up until the age of about 20, I was a fully committed evangelical Baptist. And to put that into context, the branch of Christianity to which I belonged focused on the Gospel, that is the New Testament, stories specifically relating to Jesus, and I thought it was important to share this message with other people. That's the evangelical part. The Baptist element of this sect was in reference to the active choice made as an adult to join the church. One has to choose, you don't get born into it, it's not inherited. However, when I turned about 20, I turned away from the church, and then a few years later turned away from Christianity altogether. This was largely due to reasons of what I perceived as misogyny and homophobia. More on that if you ever get me drunk. Now I am a fully committed agnostic, and I probably would have said atheist before starting this podcast, but I'm actually really becoming convinced by this Neoplatonist thing. I quite like that. We'll definitely discuss that more later. This conversion, though, would make me what's called an apostate, which I was always told growing up is the worst sin imaginable. A murderer can see the error of their ways and find forgiveness, but someone who has known the love of Jesus and rejected it has no pathway to forgiveness. So, now that I have already burnt my own bridges with the faith, I may as well tell you about the Patriarchate of Alexandria. Founded around 43 CE, so 10 years after the death of Christ, by St. Mark. He is the same St. Mark from the very famous boy band Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Now, Jesus said some pretty decent things about how to treat one another. One might assume that he mainly said things that didn't really need to be said. Don't be an a-hole sums it up. But said them he did, and Mark did a decent enough job at writing it down, or at least so I chose to believe back then. Christianity then laid low for a few hundred years, largely persecuted in the Roman Empire, along with many other sects and smaller religions. I might go so far as to say that there is nothing historically important about Christianity before about 400 CE. It was one of many small religions, the vast majority of which we don't know about. Christianity, at least, or this branch of Christianity, survived. One thing that generally separates religions that survive and those that get dumped into the dustbin of history is violence. You might think about Judaism, for instance. In the nascent stages of the Jewish faith, violence and military prowess were pivotal to its survival, establishing a secure kingdom where monotheistic worship could flourish. The military exploits of King David, in particular, were instrumental in transforming a loose confederation of tribes into a formidable nation, thereby safeguarding its unique religious identity from assimilation and conquest. David's numerous military campaigns, that is, assimilation and conquest, as chronicled in the Hebrew Bible, led to the subjugation of neighbouring peoples such as the Philistines, the Moabites, the Arameans, and by defeating these external threats, David secured the borders of his kingdom and created a stable environment where the early tenets of Judaism could be centrally established and practiced without persecution. The military and political leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was central to this process, establishing a precedent for the fusion of religious authority and armed struggle. Early military campaigns were initially framed as defensive actions against the persecutions of the Meccan Quraysh, but then later significantly more expansionist. The dictate to struggle against the world provided a divine sanction for warfare. Not for forced conversion, we should say, but to defend the Muslim community and expand the abode of Islam. Under the leadership of the first caliph who succeeded Muhammad, peace be upon him, known as the Rashidun, Muslim armies embarked on a series of stunning conquests. They defeated the Byzantine and the Persian Sassanid empires, bringing territories from the Levant to North Africa and Persia under Islamic rule in a matter of decades. Hang on a second, can I just check that? Let me double check. Did I accidentally read out the same paragraph twice? No, they are just almost identical stories of Judaism and Islam. Christianity also has its history with military struggle. You might think most famously about the Crusades of the 11th till, well, arguably the Crusades still haven't finished, but there was plenty of bloodshed before the 11th century. Bringing the story back to Alexandria, the domestic powers have very much been in the hands of the Roman Empire and the prefecture that governed, although there has been a growing spiritual power as the Christian faith spread and grew more adherents. By the time of Hypatia, Emperor Diocletian, the emperor in the East this is, has been recently carrying out the great persecution of the Christian people, a period called the Era of Martyrs. But Alexandria was a really significant focal point of the re-establishment of the religion. And this brings us on to talk about Theophilus. So he was the Patriarch of Alexandria, which was a role at the time equivalent to the Pope, as there were 5 popes at this stage who shared power across the empire. His role was not dissimilar to a modern pope, so this is one of religious leadership that was distinct from municipal leadership. The Romans had a separation of church and state, despite Christianity becoming the official religion of the empire, as there was still a very large pagan following. Theophilus took it upon himself to start crushing the influence and capital of the pagans. He destroyed temples and centres of learning, he broke up groups, and he stole assets. Hypatia was allowed to keep her school, however. We believe this was a combination of factors. For one, her political influence amongst the elite and the common folk was still just too great for him to be able to make a move against her. Alongside this, she was considered fair and moral, rather than dogmatically pagan. After all, she was more of a philosopher mathematician than theologian. But my favourite theory is that Theophilus had a protege, Synesius of Cyrene, and this is one of Hypatia's most devoted students. He later became a bishop, and he was the one who, I said, wrote her love letters earlier on in this episode. So, whether pragmatism or out of respect for his friend, Theophilus tolerated Hypatia's work. But then he went and died. So, would you like to know how the good Christians responded to the death of their leader? That's right, 3 days of violent street fighting between the 2 rival factions of Christian sects. This got so heated that the local Roman general had to step in, and he sided with Cyril, that is Theophilus's young nephew, And I think it's fair to assume that family inheritance is what qualifies you for service for God, rather than his contender, who only had years of experience and training. So the Roman general supported Cyril, but the prefect of Alexandria, the municipal leader, did not take to him. Now, this might have had something to do with the murderous purges Cyril had for the rival Christian sects, and I hope for all our sake I have said violent Christian sects for the last time. So, Prefect Orestes and Cyril were now the big rivals for power, and a small rumour went around that these two men were on the verge of setting aside their differences and becoming allies, but someone was standing in the way of this union. Someone was dripping poison into the ear of Orestes, turning his mind against the Holy See. Not just anyone, I heard it was a pagan. Hey, I heard it was Hypatia. What, Hypatia? A woman? A woman dared to have an opinion over municipal administration? Well, I think we all know what we need to do. Yep, so it's agreed, all of us. Yep, let's go tonight. A great night of violent Christian sects. So, Hypatia got herself murdered. The exact details are lost to history, so you might think that we will never have any way of really knowing if she deserved it or who the good guys and bad guys were. But you'd be wrong. No one deserves to be murdered. Her death was a crying shame. The Christians were definitely the villains of this story. Now, I haven't done any research yet on what happens next in the history of Christianity. No spoilers, please. But I can't imagine they'd murder anyone else in the name of the little baby Jesus. Surely. As a result, that's all I get to say about Hypatia. Luckily, next week we'll meet a man of whom we can say a lot. In fact, it's from him that much of the European late ancient tradition and early medieval tradition is formed. A fork in the road, if you like, between the mathematics that went west, while the rest of the learning went east. So let's say hello to Anicius Malleus Severinius Boethius. Before then, don't forget to say hello to me on Blue Sky at Mathematicians-Pod. Perhaps you could tell me that you have just left this episode a 5-star rating and left a comment. That would really make my day. Also, let me know in the comments if you think there should be more women in science, or maths, or perhaps fewer. Honestly, just say anything. It drives up my engagement statistics, and that makes me feel good. Until then, goodbye! The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.